After Hours, Chapter 5. The weekend arrived faster than Venetia had anticipated, but she didn't mind. She had been eagerly looking forward to her date night with Juno. As promised, he took her to a charming restaurant nestled in a bustling corner of San Jose, its inviting warm glow spilling out into the crisp evening air. Inside, the cozy space was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of fresh steamed dumplings, soy sauce, and ginger, creating an ambiance that felt both comforting and intimate. Venetia and Juno were seated at a small table near the window, its intimacy enhanced by the golden light cascading from the hanging lanterns above. Venetia scanned the menu with quiet enthusiasm, her lips curving into a grin as she glanced up at him. "Everything looks so good," she said, her voice light with excitement. "What do you recommend?"
Juno couldn't help but feel a flutter in his chest at her enthusiasm. He smiled, a hint of pride creeping into his gaze. "Everything here is amazing, but their vegetable pot stickers are my absolute favorite. The filling's savory and the dough is perfectly tender, and the sesame oil chili sauce, it's to die for."
"That sounds so good," she groaned in anticipation. "Let's get that and the pork soup dumplings? Also the spicy wontons," she softly exclaimed before second-guessing herself. "Too much?"
His eyes lit up at her choices. "Never too much," he said with a grin, relishing in her enthusiasm. "That combination sounds perfect. The savory, flavorful soup dumplings, the rich, spicy wontons, and the pot stickers, of course. With that and a side of fried rice, we'll be in heaven."
"Yes, can't forget the fried rice," she chuckled, setting her menu down. "So, do you come here often? How did you discover this place?" Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled, her playful mood matching the relaxed ambience of the evening.
He couldn't help but bask in her smile. Her enthusiasm was contagious, making him feel a surge of satisfaction in his chest. He chuckled at the question. "I stumbled upon this place a few months ago when I was craving good dumplings. It quickly became my go-to spot whenever I had a craving for comfort food. It's a little gem tucked away in this bustling street." He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. Her skin was warm and soft, and he idly caressed her knuckles with his thumb. "But it's even better now, with you here."
Her heart skipped a beat at his words, but before she could reply, their waitress appeared, a petite, bubbly young woman who couldn't have been older than 20.
Her bright smile widened when she saw Juno. "Hi there, welcome to Golden Dumpling House. What can I get for you?"
Venetia began to answer, but the waitress's attention was laser-focused on Juno, her gaze lingering a bit too long.
"Are you ready to order?" she asked, her voice a touch too sweet.
Venetia felt a strange tug in her chest as she watched the young waitress interact with Juno. The way the girl's eyes roamed over him, her smile a bit too friendly, her tone a bit too familiar. She tried to push the feeling aside, attributing it to her own paranoia, but the sight triggered a subtle possessiveness she hadn't realized was there until now.
"Yeah," Juno said, glancing at Venetia for confirmation. "We'll do an order of the pork soup dumplings, the spicy wontons, the vegetable pot stickers, and fried rice."
Venetia nodded, her expression composed but her brow slightly furrowed as she watched the waitress scribble the order onto her notepad. All the while she kept her eyes on Juno.
"Good choices," she said, giggling. "You seem like you really know your food." She tilted her head, leaning a little closer. "Are you a chef or something?"
"No," Juno replied as politely as he could, though his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. I like food. A lot."
The waitress giggled again and placed a hand on the tabletop, very close to his arm.
Venetia watched the exchange, her irritation growing. It was clear that the waitress was flirting with him, and Juno was too polite to shut her down.
The waitress seemed oblivious to Venetia's presence, or perhaps intentionally so. She grinned at Juno and said, "Well, you should come back more often. We always like having nice customers." Her emphasis was clear, her tone flirtatious.
Venetia's lips pressed into a thin line. She cleared her throat, finally drawing the waitress' attention. "We'll take some jasmine tea, too. Thanks."
The waitress blinked, her gaze finally shifting to Venetia. "Oh, of course," she said, quickly jotting down the note. She gave Juno one last smile before turning on her heel and walking away.
There was a moment of silence at the table. Juno shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what to say.
Venetia's expression was calm, but there was a flicker of tension in her eyes. "She clearly assumed we're not together," Venetia said suddenly, her voice steady but tinged with something more.
Juno was taken aback by her words. She had noticed the waitress's behavior, but hearing Venetia's comment made him realize something. She was right. The waitress had seen them together and immediately concluded they weren't a couple. Why? Could they be that hard to picture together? He looked at Venetia, her cool demeanor masking her true thoughts.
Her lips curled into a wry smile. It's fine, she's young. I doubt she even considered we'd be here, together like this.
Venetia, Juno said, his voice firm but gentle. It's not fine if it upsets you.
Venetia hesitated, her composure wavering for just a moment. It didn't upset me, she said softly, avoiding his gaze. It just reminded me of something I already know.
What's that? Juno leaned forward, his voice laced with concern.
That I'm older than you, Venetia said with a soft sigh. That people will notice, that they'll make assumptions. Her gaze finally lifted to meet his, her vulnerability clear.
Juno felt a pang of something in his chest, a mix of sadness, frustration, and affection. She was bothered, even hurt by the fact that people might not see them as a couple. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his calloused fingers gently brushing over her skin. I don't care, Juno said, his voice firm and sincere. I don't care that you're older. I don't care what people assume. I'm here with you because I want to be with you, Venetia. Nothing else matters.
Venetia stared at him, her expression softening as his words sank in. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. You always know what to say, don't you?
He chuckled softly, a hint of modesty in his tone. Not always, but when it comes to you, it just feels natural. He watched her, her soft smile making his heart flutter just a little. I mean it, you know, he added, gently taking her hand in his fingers gently stroking her skin. I'm always here for you, whether you're just stressed or whatever it is.
The tension between them eased as the waitress returned with their tea and dumplings. This time her demeanor was more professional, perhaps sensing the shift in the air. As they ate, Venetia found herself relaxing again, the warmth of Juno's reassurance lingering. The age gap might be a hurdle, but in that moment she realized it wasn't an insurmountable one, not with someone like him by her side. With care and tenderness, she picked up a pot sticker with her chopsticks and offered it to him, leaning forward ever so slightly as she smiled.
A small chuckle escaped him as she gestured with the pot sticker. He opened his mouth obligingly, letting her place the morsel on his tongue. The flavors burst on his tongue, the crispy exterior giving way to the rich, savory filling. He chewed slowly, savoring the taste, his gaze still on her. Delicious, he murmured after swallowing, his eyes crinkling with subtle amusement. Thanks, beautiful.
As the meal went on, the conversation lightened, drifting into stories about work, childhood memories, and favorite foods. Juno's humor brought out Venetia's laughter, and she found herself leaning into the easy rhythm they shared. The earlier tension from the waitress' flirty behavior and assumptions began to fade, though a small part of it still lingered at the back of Venetia's mind. When their plates were nearly empty, Venetia set her chopsticks down and leaned back, a satisfied smile on her face. Okay, I get it now. This place is amazing. I think I'm officially a dumpling addict.
Juno chuckled warmly at her admission. See, I told you, he said. You can trust my taste buds. I know what's good. He eyed the empty plates, a satisfied expression on his face. Then, with a playful smirk, he teased lightly. I guess I'm officially dating a dumpling addict now. I'll remember that for future restaurant decisions.
Good thing I trust you, Venetia said, her eyes warm as they met his. The words dating and trust settled deeper in her heart than she had likely intended. This was something she hadn't allowed herself to fully give or receive in a long time. She felt the weight of it now, sitting across from this younger man who, despite his inexperience, had a sincerity that disarmed her.
His smile deepened, his gaze unwavering as he held her gaze. The word trust echoed through his mind, the weight of it striking a chord within him. He reached across the table, his hand finding hers. You know, he said quietly, his thumb tracing soft circles over her skin. I trust you too. The quiet hum of the restaurant faded into the background, the moment now a bubble in time just for them.
You make this so easy, to be with you, she admitted softly, surprised at herself and feeling relieved, as she gave his hand a squeeze.
His smile grew a little more at her words and the squeeze of her hand. This beautiful, competent, older woman, and he made her feel at ease. It was an unexpected boost to his confidence, a confirmation of sorts. You're not so bad at making things easy either, he returned softly, gently rubbing his thumb over her knuckles. The waitress returned with the check, breaking the moment. Juno reached for it immediately, but Venetia was faster, pulling it toward her. "Venetia," he protested, his brows knitting together. "I've got this."
"You'll get the next one," she said. "Consider it a thank you for putting up with my insecurities tonight."
He gave her a mock pout, even as a small part of him admitted to actually enjoying her stubbornness. "Fine," he said, surrendering with a sigh. "I'll get the next one, but only because I enjoy your stubborn side." He knew better than to argue when she was this determined, and secretly, the way she took charge was kind of hot.
She lightly chuckled, paying the check before standing to leave. As they stepped outside, the cool evening air greeted them, and Venetia found herself slipping her arm through Juno's as they strolled toward his car. She didn't want their date to come to an end just yet. She was having such a great time with him.
The touch of her slender arm against his, the way she leaned into him, it sent a shiver down his spine. He found himself wishing the night could go on forever. They walked without speaking for a few moments, simply enjoying each other's company. But then, an idea popped into Juno's mind. He looked over at her, a playful smile on his lips. "Hey, I have an idea. There's a drive-in theater not too far from here. It's a bit of a drive, but I've never been to one before." He met her gaze with a hopeful expression, his eyes sparkling with excitement under the streetlights. "What do you think? Want to take a little detour?"
"A drive-in," she mused, a small smile playing on her lips. "I haven't been to one of these since... well, let's just say it's been a while."
Juno couldn't help the grin that spread across his face. The fact that she hadn't been to a drive-in movie in a long time added to the appeal. It made him feel like they were sharing something unique, something special. "Great," he said, linking his fingers with hers. "It's settled then." He led her towards his car.
Juno pulled his car into the gravel lot of the drive-in, the sky streaked with shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Venetia sat beside him in the passenger seat, glancing at the vintage marquee listing the double feature, a cult classic followed by a romantic comedy. As he put the car in park, she couldn't help but feel a surge of giddy anticipation.
There was a certain magic to the atmosphere of the drive-in theater that Juno couldn't quite put into words. The vintage appeal of the marquee, the rows of cars like little private booths, the smell of popcorn and hot dogs wafting in the air from the concession stand, it all added to the nostalgic charm. He turned to Venetia, a smile playing on his lips. "This is actually pretty cool," he said, his voice carrying a hint of surprise. "Why haven't I come here sooner?" He grinned as if he'd just remembered something and climbed out of the car. "Wait here. I'm grabbing snacks."
Venetia lightly protested, calling after him, "Not too much, okay? We just ate." She watched him jog toward the concession stand, his energy and boyish charm bringing a smile to her lips. It was one of the things she found herself drawn to. The way he balanced his endearing awkwardness with quiet confidence. How he effortlessly managed to peel away the layers of her guarded nature without even trying.
He heard her protest, but it only added to his eagerness to get the snacks. He loved how she played along, tried to act like she didn't secretly want the snacks just as much as he did. He chuckled to himself as he jogged towards the concession stand. He knew her well enough now to understand when she was just acting like she was annoyed. The thought made his heart feel lighter. After a short wait, he returned with a bucket of popcorn, 2 sodas, and a bag of chocolates under arm. The lot had filled with cars. He handed her a box of milk duds before climbing back into the driver's seat. "Popcorn, chocolate, and soda," he said, gesturing to the assortment of snacks. "I'm pretty sure this is a scientifically approved drive-in combo."
Venetia laughed, shaking her head. "It's a wonder you survived this long without experiencing this."
"Guess I was waiting for the right person." His voice was light, teasing, but his eyes held sincerity.
His words made her chest tighten. "Careful," she replied, her voice soft. "You're going to make me think you're a hopeless romantic."
"Hopeless romantic? Nah." He tossed a milk dud into the air, catching it in his mouth without a problem. The playful gesture was strangely endearing. "I just know what I like." His eyes flickered to meet hers for a moment, a hint of a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "And what I like is you."
Even in the dim light of the drive-in, Venetia could see the earnestness in his gaze. The movie started soon after his casual confession, the screen flickering to life as darkness settled over the lot. Venetia couldn't stop herself from stealing glances at him, his words lingering in her mind. She had known he was into her, but hearing him say it out loud, so openly and without hesitation, made her heart race in a way she hadn't anticipated. At some point, Juno draped a blanket over both of their laps, a quiet, thoughtful gesture that Venetia didn't comment on but appreciated nonetheless. The cult classic played on the screen, but her eyes refused to leave him. He watched the movie intently, a soft smile tugging at his lips. In the glow of the projector light, he looked younger, almost boyish, yet there was a steadiness in his expression that reminded her of how much he'd grown in such a short time.
"You're staring," he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the screen.
Venetia blinked, caught off guard. "Am I?" she replied, her tone teasing but her cheeks flushing slightly.
Juno's smirk widened as he glanced at her, clearly pleased at the effect he was having. "Yes, you are," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. He reached over, his hand resting on her thigh under the blanket. It was a possessive gesture, but not one made without care. He kept his touch light, his fingers gently tracing circles.
Venetia couldn't help but think how natural it felt having him so close to her, how easily they slotted into this new dynamic.
He leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against her ear. His next words a low whisper only. "I don't mind you staring, though."
The heat in his breath, the way his voice dropped an octave, it was almost unfairly attractive. Venetia could feel her heart skip a beat, her mind trying to string together a coherent thought while her body seemed to be aflame under his touch. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, and forced herself to reply, her voice a little hoarse. "What if I do more than stare?" Her hand mirrored his, landing gently on his thigh beneath the blanket. Her focus wasn't on the movie, though she noticed his effort to keep his eyes on the screen. Leaning in, she let her tongue trace the shell of his ear before placing a soft, lingering kiss just below it. Her hand began tracing slow, tantalizing circles up his thigh, inching closer until it reached his crotch, her movements deliberate and teasing.
Juno let out a shaky exhale, his breath catching in his throat. His grip on her thigh tightened almost imperceptibly, a subconscious reaction to her touch. He tried to keep his gaze fixed on the screen, to not give away the effect her teasing was having on him. But it was growing harder to concentrate on anything but the heat in his core, the way her hand felt burning even through the fabric of his jeans. "Venetia," he murmured, his voice huskier than before. Her name was a whispered plea, a breathless prayer begging for more of her touch.
She smirked at the sound of his pleading tone, a hint of satisfaction in her expression. She knew exactly what he wanted, and she was more than willing to give it to him. Her tongue flicked against his ear again, this time followed by gentle sucking and a playful nibble on his earlobe. Her touch on his crotch grew more deliberate.
"Oh, God," he whispered, his own breathing ragged and unsteady. The heat inside the car was stifling. He was acutely aware of the sweat on his skin and the intimacy of their positions. They sat like that, in silence, for a few moments, both needing time to catch their breath. He pulled his hand away from her, and she winced slightly at the loss of contact. He looked at her then, her cheeks flushed, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat, and he felt a deep pang of affection for her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, as he reached to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear.
She gave him a satisfied smile as she leaned back into the doorframe. We should probably fix our clothes and open the windows," she said, her voice soft yet carrying a hint of amusement.
He nodded, a small laugh escaping him as he realized the state they were in. "You're right. I don't think this car was designed for this kind of activity." He began to readjust his clothes, wincing slightly as he tried to ignore the discomfort of his damp pants.
She giggled, tugging the hem of her dress over her exposed thighs before reaching up to fix her hair and touch up her makeup in the rearview mirror. She smirked as she tugged the rumpled, now sticky blanket off their laps and tossed it into the back seat. "Sorry about the mess," she added with a playful glint in her eyes.
He chuckled, his cheeks reddening at the memory of, well, what they'd just done. It's fine," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I guess we got a little carried away." He couldn't help but glance over at her again, his eyes drawn to the way her dress hugged her figure, and he had to look away quickly before his mind started wandering again.
"Just a little," she teased with a wink before cracking the window open, letting in a breath of crisp night air. The cool contrast to the lingering warmth inside the car helped clear their heads. Turning back to him with a soft smile, she leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. Finally settled comfortably, she let out a contented sigh, ready to lose herself in the movie flickering on the outdoor projector.
He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his fingers tracing lazy circles on the exposed skin of her arm. The cool air wafting in through the open window sent a chill down his spine, but he didn't mind. Having her against him like this, warm and soft, was worth the slight discomfort. His gaze shifted to the movie playing outside, but his mind was only half on the story unfolding before them. The weight of her head on his shoulder, the scent of her hair, and the lingering hints of their shared pleasure mingled in the car, making it hard for him to focus on anything but her presence. They watched the movie in silence, their bodies pressed against each other, occasionally exchanging glances or sharing a quiet laugh at a particularly absurd scene. They found themselves leaning closer to each other, the casual comfort of their position making it natural to be so close. But neither of them moved to initiate anything more, both content to simply be there together, sharing the intimate space of the car, and watching the movie that neither of them truly focused on.
As the ending credits rolled, Venetia raised her head from his shoulder, her fingers playing with the hem of his shirt as she let out a soft hum of appreciation. "That was a really bad movie," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. Despite her words, there was a satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her lips, a look of contentment in her eyes as she looked at him.
He chuckled, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light of the projector. It was terrible, he agreed, but the words sounded fond rather than critical. His gaze drifted down to her hands, still playing with the fabric of his shirt, and he found himself wondering if she was aware of the small, teasing touches she was making.
Her touch grew more deliberate, her hand slowly gliding up his torso, fingers tracing lazy patterns over his chest. "But," she mused, her voice a low, velvety murmur that sent a tingle down his spine, "this wasn't a bad date at all. I'm kind of sad that it's coming to an end." She leaned in a little closer, wrapping her arms around his neck, her gaze soft as she looked up at him.
His breath caught in his throat, the simple gesture of her hands on his chest sending a jolt of desire coursing through him. He couldn't help but lean in, drawn to her like a magnet, the need to be closer to her overpowering everything else. "It doesn't have to end yet," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her cheeks, his gaze locked onto hers.
She reluctantly pulled away from his embrace, mischief dancing in her eyes as she smirked. "I should try to have at least some sense of restraint with you. It's embarrassing how quickly I turn into a mess in front of you." She let out a playful sigh, tilting her head. "I am a grown woman after all. I should have more elegance, leave you wanting more." Giggling, she shot him one last teasing glance before reaching for her seatbelt.
He couldn't help but let out a low chuckle, his eyes crinkling at the corners with affection. There was something undeniably cute about the contradiction between her words and her actions. Despite her claims of restraint, she was clearly just as affected by him as he was by her. "You're still elegant," he assured her, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "And believe me, I always want more."
Her smile widened at that, her gaze meeting his before dropping to his mouth for a split second. She seemed caught between wanting to stay and wanting to be the mature one who could pull herself away. "You make it hard to be sensible." She moved her hand to brush a lock of hair away from his forehead, her touch lingering just a fraction longer than needed.
He leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering shut at the sensation. He was hopelessly charmed by her, unable to resist the allure of her confident yet vulnerable demeanor. "Who says we need to be sensible all the time?" he murmured, catching her wrist to press a kiss to her palm. "Sometimes, the most fun comes from throwing sensibility out the window."
A shiver ran down her spine at his kiss. She seemed to falter for a moment, her gaze searching his, her earlier resolve diminishing with each beat of her heart. "How am I supposed to behave rationally when you get all charming like that?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Despite her words, she made no move to pull away.
His lips quirked into a smile, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes at her reaction. "Who said anything about behaving rationally?" he teased, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist. He pulled her closer, his gaze flicking down to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Maybe I want to charm you into abandoning your rationality."
She let out a mock-indignant gasp, but the effect was ruined by the light flush on her cheeks and the slight waver in her voice. "Your trouble," she accused him, a hint of laughter in her tone. Despite her words, she leaned into him, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders as she allowed herself to be drawn closer, only to pull back again. "But, no. You'll just have to wait until next time, she teased, sinking back into her seat with a smug little smile.
He couldn't help but chuckle at her tease, the feeling of her hands roaming over his chest, lingering on his skin. As he navigated the car out of the drive-in, the city lights glittered around them. The drive back to her apartment was filled with a comfortable silence, broken only by the low hum of the car engine and the occasional comment about the movie they'd just watched. Once they arrived, Juno turned off the ignition and turned to look at her, his expression a mix of anticipation and amusement. "You're enjoying this a bit too much, you know," he said, reaching across to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek.
I have no idea what you mean, she replied, her tone innocent, but a sly smirk played at the corners of her mouth. She leaned into his touch, her eyes gleaming with mischief. I'm just a mature woman, perfectly capable of restraint. She flashed him a soft smile before unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out of the car. Pausing at the door, she glanced back, her voice gentle. Thank you for tonight, I had fun. Maybe the unspoken words, "we could do this again," hovered on her lips before she swallowed them down. Instead, she covered her hesitation with a sweet, effortless good night before stepping away.
As he watched her walk away, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. There was no denying the chemistry and connection between them. Despite their agreement to keep things low-key, the spark was undeniably present, and it was obvious that it was becoming harder to deny their feelings. He waited a moment, contemplating his next move, before finally pushing out of the car. "Venetia," he called after her, jogging a few steps to catch up. "Wait."
She turned slowly at the sound of his voice, only to be caught off guard as his lips crashed down on hers. A gasp barely had time to escape before his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. Her eyes fluttered shut, hands instinctively finding their way around his neck as she melted into the kiss, passionate yet achingly tender. When they finally pulled apart, her breath hitched, eyes still dazed as she whispered, "Wow, what was that all about?"
He looked down at her, his gaze heated, his hands still firmly holding her to him. His heart was pounding, the intensity of the moment leaving him slightly winded. "Just needed to seal the night with a first-date kiss," he confessed, his voice low and rough. His hands moved to cup her face, his thumbs smoothing over her flushed cheeks, and "I wanted to remind you that sometimes giving in to what we want isn't as terrible as we think." His fingertips traced a path along her jawline, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "Sometimes it's even quite good." His voice was a mere whisper, the words tinged with promises and something more.
She shivered at his touch, her gaze locked onto his, the air between them charged with something deeper than before. The night had shifted, from playful teasing to an intimacy she wasn't sure she was ready to fully embrace. So instead of confronting the emotions stirring within her, she kept them at bay, choosing desire over vulnerability. Pressing herself against him, her body molding to his, she tilted her head up, a teasing smirk playing on her lips. "You, Juno, are a terrible influence," she murmured, her voice thick with longing.
He chuckled, the sound resonating deep within his chest, as he leaned down to place a kiss on the exposed slope of her neck. His lips lingered there for a moment, the warmth of his breath causing her to shiver involuntarily. He could feel the rapid pulse in her veins, the undeniable response she was having to his touch. His hand slid down to her hips, gripping her tightly against him. "And you, Venetia," he spoke against her skin, his voice a low rumble, "are far too tempting for your own good."
Her breath hitched at his words, her heart thudding against her ribcage, threatening to burst free from its cage. His touch was both possessive and tender, leaving her lightheaded. She found herself unable to resist the temptation, her body arching into his in a silent plea. His hold only grew tighter, his presence all-encompassing, leaving her with no escape. "Juno," she murmured, her voice a breathless pant. She no longer denied him. With the soft flutter of her eyelashes and a gentle pull of his hand, she invited him up. She led him to her apartment, and he followed willingly. All her playful restraint was forgotten as she allowed herself to indulge in him and the undeniable pull of their growing physical connection. The night unfolded in a quiet haze of heat and unrestrained desire.
As he slowly came down from the high, he nuzzled his face into the crook of her neck, planting a soft kiss on her flushed skin. "You wreck me," he mumbled against her, his voice hoarse. "Completely undo me, every goddamn time."
A soft chuckle escaped her lips as she wrapped her arms around him, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath against her. He made no effort to pull away, his body settling heavily against hers, pressing her into the mattress. The weight of him was both intimate and overwhelming, but she didn't mind. She didn't want to push him off. Moments passed before she noticed the steady rhythm of his breathing, soft, deep, and even. He had fallen asleep, still tangled with her, still inside her. She giggled quietly, running her fingers tenderly through his hair, savoring the warmth of his presence. Her thoughts drifted back to their night together, their first real date, the unexpected detour to the drive-in, the way he had been so present, so wholly focused on her. Her heart swelled. Of course, he was exhausted now. He had planned everything so thoughtfully, giving her his full attention the entire evening. If this was what being with Juno felt like, this quiet devotion, this effortless closeness, she wouldn't mind getting used to it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, feel free to visit my Patreon for more content.